Today we're going to talk about someone who vanished on September 10th of 2001 in New York City. The next day, you know what happens. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Sneha Anne Philip. She was 31 years old at the time of her disappearance. Sneha was actually born in India, and her father was a doctor. She had two brothers, and they actually moved to the U.S. when Sneha was a child, largely because the father felt there were more opportunities in America. Sneha was a resident of internal medicine at St. Vincent's Hospital in Staten Island, New York, at the time of her disappearance. She was also married to Ron Lieberman, who was another doctor. Ron and Sneha had only been married for about a year. They actually had met in medical school in Chicago. Sneha and Ron live at an apartment complex called Rector Place near Battery Park in Manhattan, near the World Trade Centers. Ron was Jewish, and Sneha, in one of the reports I saw, she was actually Christian, even though India is largely a Hindu. People from India practice Hinduism, which I found surprising, but it's not really relevant to the story. But you had a Jewish person, a white person marrying an Indian person, which is a little unique. Both of them were really into art, though. Sneha was a painter, Ron was a musician, and both of them really bonded on their love for arts, even though their profession was medicine, which is a very difficult career to get into. And they had moved to New York City to get internships at New York City hospitals. It's been reported that Sneha had a little bit of an alternative lifestyle. There has been reports that she was lesbian. She dated other women. There was even one report that her brother John said that she saw Sneha having sex with another woman. Sneha had problems with alcohol. She was in an alcohol management program at one of the hospitals she worked at, and one of the her original hospital that she worked at actually decided not to renew her contract, probably most likely because of the alcohol issue. So Sneha actually, her original hospital, which I believe was Cabrini Medical Center, did not renew her internship contract. I don't know how common that is. From my understanding, it's probably not that common. She thought there was some discrimination going on. There was also an incident when one of her fellow employees, her colleagues, supposedly groped her. So we knew that her original internship did not go that well, but she did get another position at St. Vincent Hospital. And, Sneha went to bars, had alcoholic problem. She had this incident where she was in court the day of September 10th. Sneha refused to recant her sexual assault claim, her claim that one of her former employees sexually assaulted her. So we know, things are a little rocky in her personal life. It was reported some nights she didn't come home to her husband Ron, and this was when they were still married. Ron even described their lifestyle as not conservative, but Ron did not seem to be upset about it. After her disappearance, he was very assertive trying to find her. He was even in Unsolved Mysteries. They did a case on her. They go to court, and Sneha then that afternoon talked to her mom for around 2 hours. She had a guest, a cousin, coming to stay with her and Ron a little bit later in the week, so she was cleaning. Later that night, we know that she was seen on camera at Century 21 department store buying clothes, shoes, lingerie, other clothing. So she bought a lot of clothing. I think I've seen a report of like $500. And we see her on camera. At approximately 7:18 that night, we see her on camera at Century 21, and that's the last we've ever seen of her. That's the last evidence we have. Ron eventually came home later that night. He saw Sneha wasn't there, but because she had stayed out and didn't come back other times, he didn't panic. So he went to bed. He woke up 6:30 the next morning and went to the hospital where he worked for his job. Didn't have any call or connection with Sneha. There was a report that he received a phone call at around 4 a.m. in the morning, but he didn't pick up and he doesn't remember this. So Ron goes to work, and then around 8:45 in the morning, the first plane hits the World Trade Center. Then a short time later, the second plane hits the other building of the World Trade Center. Obviously, I'm sure you probably know what happens next. Eventually, both buildings fall down. But something that I think is important to note, that the building that was hit second actually fell first. You would think the first building hit by the plane in the terrorist attacks would fall first. It was actually the second building. So Ron is at the hospital. A lot of doctors brace for a mass casualty event at many of the hospitals at 9/11. 9/11 didn't have the amount of injuries that severe injuries where you would triage victims like you would see in a war zone. It was largely, and I'm trying to say this as humanely as possible, knowing the devastating tragic events of it. If you made it out of the building, you were largely okay. You either were above where the plane got hit and you likely didn't make it out, or you were below it and you could get out, or you were killed in the rubble. There was not too many people that survived. I've seen it only been like around 15 people actually survived the collapse of the towers. So if you were in the towers when they collapsed, you were most likely dead. There wasn't many people who had moderate injuries. It was largely one of these things, you were either alive or you were dead. There's even been like footage on 9/11, doctors waiting outside that night, waiting to receive a bunch of bodies or people on stretchers, and they just didn't come. So Ron is at the hospital. He sees the terrorist attacks. He's bracing for, a bunch of bodies to come in. The most likely at his hospital, they weren't overrun with patients, so he was able to get in an ambulance and get to downtown Manhattan, which took like 6 hours from where he was at. He gets down to ground zero. They put the police tape off and they've sealed off the area, but because Ron was a doctor and was most likely in his scrubs, he was able to get through, and he was able to get to his apartment, which was about 3 blocks from the World Trade Center where Sneha was supposed to be, and there was a bunch of dust in the apartment from the explosion and the bombing, but he didn't see any footprints. He just saw paw prints from his cat. To give you some perspective, Ron's hospital was Jacobi Medical Center, and that was about 18 miles away from the World Trade Center, which during 9/11, it could make sense why it took 6 hours to get to. When Ron got back to the apartment, he thought Sneha would be there just because he expected her to come home after a night out. And she wasn't there. And Ron then stayed with a friend. He didn't know what was going on, but he didn't hear from Sneha. And there was something like 9,000 people reported missing from the World Trade Centers those initial couple days after the terrorist attacks. And Sneha was just one of the many thousands. Many of the people were found, obviously, but Sneha is one of the very, very few people that have never been found after 9/11. Sneha's family got involved. Her mother, brothers went to search for her. Her brother even said in the news, and he talked to her from the building being attacked. He later just said he made it up just to try to get attention for his sister because there were so many people desperate to find out what happened to their loved one that day. After the initial terrorist attacks, the case has largely gone cold. The last piece of hard evidence we have is Sneha at the Century 21 department store buying clothes. After the years went by, there was disputes within the family. The family fought for Sneha to be remembered, to be part of the 9/11 victims, to be on the list. And they actually went to court, and the first time court initially ruled that there was no hard evidence that Sneha was there, but then eventually, after the family persuaded and kept fighting for Sneha's legacy, they believed, the court overturned this ruling, and Sneha is actually on the official 9/11 memorial in New York City. The family has largely believed that Sneha ran into one of the Twin Towers to help people because she was a doctor and she was killed in the explosion. There's been other theories, though, that Sneha had this alternative lifestyle and she was possibly murdered. She met someone. She just ran into foul play the night before September 11th because she she didn't come home. Someone believing to be Sneha did go to the apartment, her apartment complex, and she's in the lobby, and then at 8:43 she walks off screen, and it's believed that the family believed that was Sneha coming back from the night out, doing whatever she was doing, and then hearing the explosion and then running towards the Twin Towers. I don't have the video, but it's been reported the video is very blurry. All they could kind of make out was it was a woman wearing a dress similar to Sneha, but there was no bag. She bought all this stuff at the store. She would probably have 4 or 5 bags. She bought shoes, clothes. She wasn't carrying any bags. It's debated whether that was her or not. Ron that morning left around 6:30, so he wouldn't have been there. And the family has largely believed that video put Sneha in the building, in her apartment building, near the time of the terrorist attacks, the first plane hitting the building, and positions her in a way to run to the scene to help people. There's actually a really good podcast about this that I found out. That's how I largely found out about Sneha's disappearance, and I recommend you check that out because it's like 10 episodes long, and it has a lot of really good details about this case. Again, the family believes that that video puts her there, and at the apartment, she went to the World Trade Centers to help people. One of the real interesting things about the podcast went through is that that September 11th was actually the most photographed event in history. And there's all these videos. There's not a ton of videos, but there's videos and cameras, still photos. If this was, this happened in 2020, there'd be so much more photos. But the podcast went through this. They had, 80,000 images of 9/11, and they went through to see if they could sort through any of the photos to see if they could identify Sneha and put her at the scene of 9/11, and they couldn't. Maybe the technology will improve. Maybe there will be a possible lead come out of that. But as of this point, doing massive AI photo searching for people's faces, bodies, that hasn't piled up any leads. Kind of wrapping things up, kind of the main theories are that Sneha was either murdered, and many people could suspect her alternative lifestyle, going to bars late at night, alcohol problems could have gotten into some kind of trouble. Some people believe she committed suicide, but I don't think that's too likely. That's always an option in these vanishing people. But it seemed like she was making plans for the future. She had a career. She had a decent career. She was married. I don't think that was that was very likely. And then the 9/11 theory that she ran into one of the Twin Towers and tried to help people. I'm going to side with the 9/11 that she went into the Twin Towers to try to help people. I think it's the most likely version of this case. There is always a chance they might find a kind of debris or some kind of personal identification in all the ruins of 9/11 and in one like the landfills with all the ruins of 9/11 and debris. The podcast that I saw, it was called Missing on 9/11. It kind of goes into this, and that identifiable items have been found in the debris of all these kind of massive landfills of 9/11. And I think that's a possibility. But ultimately, kind of to wrap things up, I think it's most likely she did go into the Twin Towers. I think it's more likely than that she did that than she met foul play. And that's really all I'm going to say about this. This is a very interesting case. There's obviously really nothing similar to this case. What do you think happened to Sneha? Leave it in the comments section below. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, subscribe to Crimeda.